In the depths of the Tumbling Run forests had dwelt an Indian enchanter, at whose command the storm fiends of the Devil's Hole would arise and sweep the valley. A few miles from Orwigsburg was the Devil's Rock, where the fiend himself held his court, while on the peaks of the Blue Mountains on misty days the steam could be seen arising where the demon wolves cooked their metzel soup. And deep in the heart of these mountains lay buried the books of Moses, volumes of awful power, guarded by gigantic scorpions, fearful to contemplate. This was the land of the great magician Paul Heim, of haunted houses, haunted barns, haunted graveyards, and haunted lanes.
They claim that our eyes will just be created a slightly different from what they are. We talk, we see things are.
Welcome to Strange Familiars. How you doing tonight, Allison?
Doing well.
On tonight's show, we're going to be discussing the Witchcraft of Paulheim, but we'll get into that in a minute. Have some announcements to make. The Cape Girardeau paranormal thing that John and Tyler and I were going to be at, and Josh Cutchin was as well, has been canceled. So we will not be in Missouri at the end of August.
At least not for that reason.
Yeah, something might come up and maybe there's a Bigfoot flap and I need to go to Missouri at the end of August. But for the conference that we were advertising before, that is not happening. I want to thank everyone who has contributed to our GoFundMe. Thank you so much, everyone. That's a huge help. It's still up. The links will be in the show notes as well. Once again, this is to help us get mainly a new laptop, but some other tech we need to go forward with the show. But again, times are uncertain at best. I completely realize that. If we don't get this new tech, the show will go on. It's not in danger of stopping or anything like that. But if you can help, if you can afford to help, we do greatly appreciate it. Again, GoFundMe links in the show notes. And we did a post on Patreon and a post on strangefamiliars.com and I think Instagram and Facebook as well. So you should be able to find the links around. And once again, thanks to everybody who's donated to that. It's such a big help. Thank you so much. Is there something else in terms of announcements?
Can't think of what it would be.
Yeah, I think that's it. So we're on to the Witchcraft of Paulheim. Interestingly, this is in the same region as the Hexcat of Tumbling Run, which we did a few episodes ago. And I should thank my friend Mark Scabs, who told me about Paulheim. He said, you got to check out, look for this article. It's called The Witchcraft of Paulheim. That sent us down this rabbit hole on this guy and led to this episode. So thanks so much to Mark. He's the one who I would not have known about it without Mark. So thank you, Mark.
It does kind of play into your idea, though, that certain places have like repeated.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I need to go there.
It's not even that far away, right?
No, it's not terribly far away. No.
This is in Schuylkill County?
Mm-hmm.
Near Berks, like the border of Berks and Schuylkill?
I think so. So, a little reading here. We have to set the mood. In the depths of the Tumbling Run forests had dwelt an Indian enchanter, at whose command the storm fiends of the Devil's Hole would arise and sweep the valley. A few miles from Orwigsburg was the Devil's Rock, where the fiend himself held his court, while on the peaks of the Blue Mountains on misty days the steam could be seen arising where the demon wolves cooked their metzel soup. And deep in the heart of these mountains lay buried the books of Moses, volumes of awful power, guarded by gigantic scorpions, fearful to contemplate. This was the land of the great magician Paul Heim, of haunted houses, haunted barns, haunted graveyards, and haunted lanes. Being thus brought in constant contact with the realm of spirits, it is not to be wondered that the inhabitants of Pinedale stood in great awe of the powers of darkness. So that was from a little essay that was written about a school teacher named Leno, who was haunted by this black dog. But it tells a little bit about the area, and I felt like that sort of set the mood, set the tone for this episode, and makes me want to go to, if not move to, Schuylkill County. So Paul Heim is considered to be, by many, the first German witch doctor or powwower.
He is here incredibly early in the history of the United States.
He really is. He may be. He predates Mountain Mary. So the fact that, I've heard of Mountain Mary. I think most people heard of Mountain Mary who are into powwow and brockery and stuff. The fact that he predates her, and that I just hadn't heard anything about him other than Mark had told me a couple things, but I didn't, really do the research. As far as we can tell, he was born around 1715.
That is really early.
Yeah.
He's here pre the establishment of many of the counties that we're about to talk about. They just don't exist right?
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So in 1715, what does Pennsylvania look like as far as?
A lot of trees.
Yeah.
A lot of trees.
But as far as towns that have sprung up already, besides
Philadelphia, Lancaster, probably.
Yeah, so William Penn only established it in the 1680s, so we're talking the first 35, 40 years of Pennsylvania's history.
Mm. He arrived in America in 1733.
He was German?
Yeah.
He came from Germany?
Mm-hmm.
Not Switzerland or...
Well, not sure where he came from. Yeah. He came from the Pennsylvania Dutch diaspora, right?
Okay.
Swiss, German.
Austrian.
Yeah, somewhere in there. He died on September 1st, 1808, at the age of 93 years. He had 3 sons, George, Paul, and John. Go ahead.
Ringo has not been heard from.
And 2 daughters, Barbara and Elizabeth. There's a little bit about him on Find a Grave. It says his will on record at the Berks County Archives. So I think maybe at the time he died, parts of Schuylkill County might have been Berks or the other way around or something.
While you're reading that, I'm going to look up when Berks County became incorporated, just for...
His will on record at the Berks County Archives mentions that he was of Brunswick Township, his wife Catherine, oldest son George, sons Paul and John, and daughters Barbara and Elizabeth. Schuylkill County, Pennsylvania genealogy, family history, biography, containing historical sketches of old families and of representative and prominent citizens, past and present, by J.H. Beers, Chicago, 1916, Volume 1, page 522, quote, Paul Heim, as the name was originally spelled, grandfather of Jacob F. Heim, came to this section when the Indians were still plentiful here, but his intercourse with them was always friendly and they never molested him. This will be contested in the other stories we read. They often came to his cabin, and it is said that it was his custom to set a dish of bread and milk before each Indian that visited him. Paul Heim was a native of Germany. There it is. Yes, he was from Germany.
Mm-hmm.
And came to America when 18 years old. For a time, he lived in Berks County. In 1747, crossing the Blue Mountains and settling into what is now Auburn, Schuylkill County. in the earliest days of its settlement. He cleared land and engaged in farming and assisted in all the other work of shaping a thriving community. He was especially remembered for his zeal in the organization of Zion's church there, and assisted in erecting its house of worship, known as the Old Red Church. Some of his fellow workers being Peter Schmetgert, Peter Naaman, Jacob Schaefer, Michael Diebert, Gottfried Bayer, Philip Paulsman, Christian Schabbat, Caspar Prague, and George Hunsinger. Those aren't very German names.
No, I'm about to look up my dad's insane genealogy to see if any of these people are.
I imagine they are. The original membership of this famous old church comprised about 100 scattered over a large territory, as it was the only organization at the time north of the Blue Mountains. The church building was begun in 1765 and completed in 1770. Mr. Heim served the congregation faithfully as one of its officials, and both he and his wife were laid to rest in the burial ground of this church. So he's buried in Zion's Red Church Cemetery.
Have we talked about the Red Church and what the Red Church might mean?
I believe we did. Did we do it this long ago? We might have done an episode where somebody talked about going to what they called the Red Church, which I believe was out. Their Red Church was outside of Philadelphia.
Okay, so
that was haunted or something like that. There are a couple, if not more, maybe a few different red churches in Pennsylvania, which are supposed to have legends and hauntings and so forth about them. It's also referenced in Powwow and Brockery. Not this specific red church, but sort of a red church.
Mm-hmm.
There are charms in Powwow which mention red churches and red hills and red books and so forth. So I think all of these things kind of come together to make almost any red church, sort of have power.
And do you think it's because of like just the symbolism of the color red as opposed to?
Well, the symbolism red is huge in Powwow for sure. Like you'll come across that again and again and again.
Because it's blood? Because of
blood, fire, if you're doing healing, red represents inflammation and all these different things like that. So,
and is this a direct correlation with, the blood of Christ, wounds of Christ kind of stuff?
I would almost guarantee it, which is a segue into, as we talk about this, we should probably do a brief sideline on Powwow once again. I think it was episode 100 where we had the interview with Philip Smith.
Yeah. So episode 1, we talk about the famous hex murder, which deals with Powwow. Locally, episode 100, we talk. Well, we don't talk to them because they're probably people who are dead. But my mother talked to local powwowers.
It was just Philip Smith. Like the other interviews and stuff, I held back.
Oh, you never released this?
Never released that.
Oh, okay. But my mom did interview
Philip Smith.
Smith and a bunch of people at a.
But no one got to hear that. They only heard the interview.
Okay.
So Powwow is a local Pennsylvania German, although it does filter down through Appalachia as well. It's a folk magic practice. There is a almost desperate attempt by modern pagans and neo-pagans to connect it to some like hidden form of paganism, and they overlay German paganism over top of Powwow. The earliest books from which Powwow was taken, in fact, the book that inspired The Long Lost Friend, it was German title, like the Romanist Buchlein or something like the little book of the Roma, basically. Powwow was very popular among Pennsylvania Protestants. But that little book of the Roma, the first charm in the book is a charm to protect one when traveling. And it reads like anything from a Catholic prayer book. I mean, it talks about the Virgin Mary and the virgin birth, and to say 3 Ave Marias, it is very Catholic.
Because the Romani people were?
Probably. And who knows if it was really, the gypsy witch fortune telling cards,
Yeah, if you want sort of like
they weren't really gypsy, like it was just a thing. So people have been using that sort of thing.
There's a connotation of
mystery and so forth. Yeah. So who knows? But the book itself is very Catholic. Homan himself was Catholic. I think a lot of the German pietists took on powwow.
Mm-hmm.
And because Pennsylvania was prominently Protestant,
Mm-hmm.
it became seen as this sort of Protestant tradition. I'm sorry to hurt people's feelings. You know what I mean? Like, and I'll give an example. And I've been doing some research on this. There's something that they call the Hexenfuß. And they'll say in powwow, they'll say, carve the Hexenfuß on the barn door to protect it from witches or whatever. And then if you look in other charms, it'll say carve a goose's foot on the barn door to keep out witches. So there's a question is like, what is the Hexenfuß then? And some of these publications, they say, oh, a Hexenfuß is a pentagram. That's what it is. They just state it straight out. Maybe a pentagram is used in powwow. There's no doubt about that. It does come up. But when they say carve a goose's foot, and also when you talk about a witch's foot, what looks more like that, you know, if you're familiar with the Elhaz rune or like the upside down peace symbol, maybe that looks like a goose foot, looks like a bird's foot. So when they say carve the witch's foot to protect, that's what it is. So why is it called the witch's foot? I go all the way back to Perchta. She was known as the Christmas witch. She had one foot that was human and the other foot was a goose's foot. So carve the witch's foot on the door. I think it's that symbol. Now, people are like, oh, that's a remnant of paganism. That's an old rune. It is. It's the Elhaz rune. And it was a protection rune. So it kind of makes sense. But that sort of rune scholarship and like people like digging into like the Germanic history and stuff really wasn't happening in the 1600s when powwow was kind of coming to the fore in Germany. And then when, you know, thereafter moving here, these people really, let's face it, they weren't studying runes. But if you look into what's called a forked cross, it's the same symbol. And they call it, and it appeared in Germany, Austria, and the Alsace region, and Switzerland. So basically everywhere the Pennsylvania Dutch came from. And they called it the mystic's crucifix. It was a mystical symbol. Taking this further, I asked Brother Richard, what can you tell me about this forked cross? And he, you know, in terms of Germany at this time, and he said, German Catholics would have seen this on the vestments of priests. And therefore they would have associated that symbol with protection. So if there is some kind of like hazy memory of runes for people.
Yeah, maybe like an epigenetic thing or like, like a...
And that is a
collective memory.
A sort of somewhere way in the back of their, collective memory. That is a protection. But now you've overlaid this forked cross on it, this mystic's crucifix, which is the same symbol. And by the way, Catholics might have done that on purpose. They did. They did that frequently. You know, here's a symbol of protection. Well, you know,
you already have one like that, so we'll just appropriate it. Yeah.
So it would have like reinforced that, I think, if there was any memory at all of the runes. I really don't think there was. I think these people, I think that was the mystic's crucifix. And it makes more sense in terms of powwow and all that. So powwow, despite what some people are trying to suggest, is not some kind of hidden pagan tradition. It is a faith healing tradition of German Pietists and German Catholics then that brought it to America. It is a sort of a Christian faith healing, sympathetic magic practice. All right, back to Paul Heim.
I presume he's just a farmer because there aren't that many options. And
I believe he specifically was a farmer. I believe it says so. So we will start with Marvelous Stories of Sorcery and Witchcraft. These were written in the 1800s about Paul Heim, almost a century after he died.
Mm-hmm.
There are references to Native Americans in here that are not friendly, not nice.
And rely on stereotypes.
Yeah. So our interest is the witchcraft of Paulheim, not any kind of like racism or cultural ickiness that is expressed in these articles.
Marvelous stories of sorcery and witchcraft. How Mr. Heim terrorized the Indians and how a band of torturers was annihilated and a woman saved.
See, that goes like in direct opposition to the thing we read before that said he was always friendly.
Yeah, and they said like he, in one of the articles, I don't know if we'll read it at one point, that he always left bread and milk out for.
That was that was in the one we read.
And everything was copacetic because of that.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently not.
Well,
Yeah. Some years ago, a prominent state official at Harrisburg, who was largely instrumental in having the Pennsylvania archives printed and published, stated to the writer that up to the time of their publication, they had been kept in open barrels and boxes and in loose bundles in the cellar of one of the public buildings at Harrisburg, and that they had lain there such a length of time that the materials about the public buildings no longer knew what they were and regarded them as rubbish fit only for destruction, that many of them were trampled and destroyed, and eventually their place of repose was made an ash pit from which it was difficult to resurrect them.
As a researcher, does that give you like little heart palpitations when you hear about stuff like that?
How they just threw them in barrels, and
just
eventually it was like, we don't even know what this is, so we'll just throw it away. Not like, let's keep it, and then maybe in the future it'll be...
Yeah, let's have someone go through this and see what it just like...
something important. This is why our history is so incredibly incomplete, because it's really just what's been saved.
Mm-hmm.
And in this way, they were rescued in a most imperfect condition. Hence, however sparsely the early history of the province may have been put in writing, even the little that was so preserved met the ruthless hand of neglect and destruction. Men like Captain Morgan wrote little. Instead of writing history, they made history. Their work and their sacrifice in many instances cannot be known from the individual thing that they did, but must be gathered from the whole. The work of these individuals went to make up a grand whole, and to view and appreciate their glory, we must look to the structure as a whole, having but a few glimmerings of their share in any particular part. Considering these facts, it is a matter of congratulation that even so much remains, enough to make established history based upon the record, requiring neither tradition nor the dramatic or heroic pen of the novelist or poet to invest this region with all the romance of Indian tragedy and warfare. Nor did the Blue Mountain region fall behind the noted Catskills in the supernatural and the unearthly. The demons who presided over Rip Van Winkle's orgies had their peers in these mountains. The impenetrable wilds of these mountains were invested with all kinds of sorcery and witchcraft, and there were not a few fortunate or possibly ill-fated men and women in these mountains who possessed wonderful supernatural powers over their fellow man, the source and secret of which lay mainly in the possession and a knowledge of the uses of the 6th and 7th book of Moses. It was through this secret and powerful agency that Old Man Heim was said to be able to transform any Indian, bent on havoc or mischief, into any animal or serpent he chose, and this power gave him full immunity from the depredations of the Indian. Heim lived on the plantation next to Fort Lebanon, in a blockhouse still standing, and it is an old tradition in the community that to rid oneself of a troublesome Indian, he needed only to mention Heim's name, and the Indian would run away. Heim did not always rely on the supernatural agencies for his protection, but he had constantly his wits about him. That is such a Dutchy thing. Keep your wits about you, right? Like, that is like one of those things I heard. It is related to him, and from good authority, even at this late day, that the Indians, owing to their great fear of him, determined that he must be done away with, and they therefore selected the most cunning in murdercraft to kill him. One day, while he was plowing in the field, with his rifle slung over his shoulder, and with both eyes open, he noticed a peculiar bush at the end of his clearing towards which he was approaching. A careful study of the situation, while plodding along in his furrows, convinced him that this particular bush was not placed in that particular part of the clearing by the hand of nature. He turned the stubborn glebe seemingly carelessly along until he reached a point within his rifle range, and being to the leewards of his horse, drew bead on the bush and fired. The death yell of despair floated on the morning air, and the most cunning of all of his tribe lay dead at his feet. The supernatural having crept into this paper, it is deemed proper that a word or two more should be said about it in order that the fears of lonely travelers over these mountains may be allayed and even set at rest forever. The writer has it from good authority that the last of this awful and mysterious volumes was destroyed many years ago, and sorcery and witchcraft is no longer believed to exist there, and for that reason. But many of the denizens of these wilds, and some in the reclaimed portions and living under the shadow of the schoolhouses, have no doubt that these awful mysterious forces held full sway in the dim ages of the past, and the many uncanny nooks and caves are silent monitors to them to tread softly, for they are on, if not secret, yet consecrated ground. Sympathy still runs deep for poor unfortunate Mr. N., who lived and died in the Blue Mountains long ago, who was possessed of an evil spirit wrought out of these somber-looking volumes by a woman learned in the arts they taught and inspired. For days and months and years he was doomed to walk back and forth in his orchard, until it was so worn that it was pointed out for many years after his death as N Walk.
That's his name.
His name, yeah.
His name began with an N, and
they don't know what his name was.
Yeah.
Nor was this curse removed from him until the death of the old witch who had thus charmed his life. Happily, he lived a free and untrammeled life after death had allayed the force of her magic. Then, too, they have not forgotten old Mrs. R., whose power derived from these books was simply marvelous. Among other performances was this. It was often noticed that her husband would disappear at intervals for several days at a time. Then, on a sudden, he would again be seen in his wonted place, and pursuing his customary employment. The secret was, however, eventually unraveled. It was discovered that during these intervals of the absence of the husband, there would be stalled in the barn a fine, large, fatted ox, sometimes a beautiful white, sometimes a glossy black, and then again a dun. The butchers from across the mountains would be invited to purchase, and after the shiny gold was well stowed away in the left foot stocking, securely sealed into the cellar wall with a stone slab, first having been spat upon on the inner side, the butcher would drive off his ox. Invariably, however, when they would reach a certain point near the top of the Blue Mountains, the ox would run away into the thicket, and nothing more would ever be seen or heard of him, and on that same evening the return of Mr. R. would always be heralded to the neighbors. That the old woman would, in this wise and for the purpose of worldly gain, transform her husband into a fatted ox was not only one of the wonders and beliefs of that day, but there are still those whose reverence for the ancient departed who related and believed it makes them believe it even at the present day. Who would expunge from Shakespeare the little fairies and witches who controlled the destinies of so many people? Who would willingly part with the memory of the banshee, the bogey, and the other supernatural agencies that transplanted so many of our youthful hours into the land of enchantment? Far be it from the design of this paper to steal away from those early scenes one jot or tittle of the magic charms that still environ the Blue Mountains with a halo of romance and enchantment. Many a fathom dark and deep I have laid the book to sleep, ethereal fires around it glowing, ethereal music ever flowing, the sacred pledge of heaven, all things severe, each in his sphere, save man for whom 'twas given. Lend thy hand and lend shalt spy things ne'er seen by mortal eye. May 19th, 1896.
Strange Familiars is brought to you by our patrons. Thank you, patrons. Thank you so much. We could not do Strange Familiars without your help. If you like Strange Familiars and you'd like to help us make the show and get extra content besides, you can become a patron on Patreon. It's patreon.com/strangefamiliars. All of our patrons get commercial-free versions of the weekly shows, plus extra episodes. We do at least one full extra episode for our patrons every month. Sometimes we do more. And our Patreon patrons also get to take place in an ongoing paranormal experiment, which has just kicked off, but you can join in at any time. The more the merrier. Some pretty neat stuff coming in as far as synchronicities and odd things happening, both for us and for our patrons who are participating. I think it's going to be a lot of fun, and we're busy documenting everything that we can regarding that. There's also a program on Apple Podcasts. It's called Patron of the Strange there, and our Apple Podcast subscribers also get the commercial-free shows weekly and the extra episodes monthly. And once again, I want to thank all of our patrons, no matter where they're signed up. Thank you so much. Multiple mentions of the 6th and 7th books of Moses.
Which are kind of part of the trifecta of powwowing.
Yeah, you got the Romanes Buchlene is the first one that's very rare. You got the long lost friend, and then the long hidden friend, and all the variants.
Egyptian
secrets, and the 6th and 7th books of Moses. Now, many powwowers considered the 6th and 7th books of Moses to be kind of like the black magic books. They were like the bad ones.
So you wouldn't heal somebody with that. That would be to be more like of a cursing, vexing kind of nature.
Yeah, and like to transform yourself into animals and things like that. So, and they mentioned that it's gone. There's still copies around. In fact, there's a copy in this house, maybe 2. Here's a note. The grave of Heim's Indian. So this is the writer of these papers will perform, and with very great pleasure, a duty to history. The 2 Indian tales that appeared in yesterday's paper. So these were all printed in newspapers, these tales of Paul Heim originally. Whereas therein stated traditional purely. And whilst he believed in these cases the truth of tradition, knowing the reliability of its source, yet tradition fortified by the record, is considered in and out of the courts of law of much higher value. It is therefore extremely satisfactory to the writer, as it will doubtless be to the reader, to be able to say that corroborative evidence of nearly every fact related does exist. And the fact that so much is corroborated by extraneous facts goes far to establish the truth of the whole. In the Heim case, there has been shown to the writer an official state map of the Heim plantation showing the burial place of a solitary Indian marked on the ground. So he says there's a place where the grave was. So next we get to the Witchcraft of Paulheim.
And there's a little quote that starts it off, but it's not attributed to anyone. It's just a little quote. There's something in that ancient superstition, which erring as it is, our fancy loves. Ain't that the truth? It is not the purpose of the writer to enter upon a lengthy dissertation upon witchcraft, but rather to lead the reader back to an ancient time when knowledge was not so generously diffused and when even Christianity was surrounded by and environed in a web of superstition that made its votaries loyal alike to both. Probably one of the very last of the relics of barbarism tolling to our advancing civilization is superstition. Indeed, no man has yet said that it is not still a most potent factor in the beliefs and actions of many of the more ignorant of all countries. Nor is it confined to the ignorant alone. Who of us can freely say that he does not even yet find a little of it in his own composition? Of course, we disclaim it and pity the poor unfortunate who bleeds or is found guilty, but as a general thing, we don't care much to talk about it as a personal trait. But when we consider that the highest civilization brought a avowed superstition with it up to but 2 or 3 centuries ago, we ought not wonder that it was, and in some cases is, yet a part of our very being. How was it in England so late as 2 or 3 centuries ago, for instance? In the latter part of the 16th century, when Reginald Scott, a scholar trained at Oxford, wrote what was then thought a most remarkable book entitled The Discovery of Witchcraft. This publication had for its principal object the rational education of the public and scholastic mind, so as to put an end to the cruel persecution of witches. In his premise, he states that there will be found among our witches only 2 sorts, the one sort being such by imputation as so thought of by others, and these are abused and not abusers, and the other by exception, as being willing so to be accounted, and these being mere causseurs. He worked out this thesis in a large number of books, with great learning and acuteness, as it is stated, and in a spirit of righteous indignation against the witchmongers. The first edition appeared in 1584, but no sooner had King James ascended the English throne than he ordered that the book be burned, and all that could be found were so destroyed. Nor did any other writer make the attempt to enlighten the English mind, or indeed any other nation, in this zealously guarded belief, until Balthazar Bekker of the northern Netherlands, nearly 100 years later, wrote his celebrated work entitled The World Bewitched, in which he examined minutely the phenomena ascribed to spiritual agency, and exposed the absurdity of the beliefs regarding the power of Satan, as he had become part of the Christian belief and doctrine. But even at that late age, the beliefs were yet so securely lodged in the scientific and Christian mind that Bekker was denounced, and his office of the ministry was taken from him. He died less than 200 years ago, nor need we cross seas to find out how securely these beliefs remained up to within 2 centuries of us. We need not but look at the statute books of the early New England provinces, and we need not read the history of the town of Salem and other Christian communities in these provinces to find out how rigorously the laws punishing the recognized black art of witchcraft were executed. While great abuse flowed from these beliefs, and our forefathers were led to do many things that we ought alone for and feel heartily ashamed of, yet it was not an unmixed evil. Many beautiful traditions have flowed from them, and we may say even blessings. Had not the wishes of the heath and the cave cried out to Macbeth, one of the long line of ancient Scottish kings, "All hail Macbeth, hail to thee, Thane of Glamis. All hail Macbeth, hail to thee, Thane of Cawdor, all hail Macbeth, thou shalt be king hereafter."
All hail Macbeth, hail to thee, Thane of Glamis. All hail Macbeth, hail to thee, Thane of Cawdor. All hail Macbeth, that shalt be king hereafter.
And again from the apparition, "Laugh to scorn the power of man, for none of women born shall harm Macbeth. Macbeth shall never vanquished be until great Birnam Wood to high Dunsany hill shall come against him."
Be bloody, bold, and resolute, laugh to scorn the power of man, for none of woman born shall harm Macbeth. Macbeth shall never vanquished be, until great Birnam Wood to high Dunsinane hill shall come against him.
Did I say that right?
Burnham Wood, Dunsinane Hill, I think.
Dunsinane, sorry, yeah. I get that, and there's a Lovecraft thing that's Dunsany, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
If these had not played their part, one of the grandest productions of the greatest literary genius of the world in all ages would never have become a part of our literature. What though the witch's prophecy guided the poniard of death to the heart of Duncan, the good and greatly beloved king, or betrayed the friend of his bosom and the sharer of his secret to the cruel blow of the murderer, we forget even to pity these in the high action that goes on all about them, and all at the instigation of Hecate and her witches. Hecate and her witches.
It's, yeah.
Depends who you
I think
ask.
it depends. Yeah.
Okay. I feel like that's changed since even I started.
Yeah. That's Hecate, you know.
He Kate. I'm starting. I'm gonna say he Kate. And again, had it not been for the secret power that was invested in the possession of that awful volume hidden in Melrose Abbey by Michael Scott in the 13th century, Michael Scott, the Lay of the Last Minstrel would never have been written. And from what we can gather from history, it is reasonably safe to assume that if the great Wizard of the North had never written the lay, his fame, if any he would ever have acquired, would be buried within the folds of a few dusty law briefs in some unknown vault of court records, for it was in the writing of this beautiful, high-strung, yet simple ballad that he discovered that literature and not the law was his highway to fame. On the other hand, he is today the dearest companion of every fireside in the enlightened world. The offices of this wonderful book of Michael Scott were not dissimilar to those which other books and charms performed among the early settlers of Schuylkill County. And if the name of Michael Scott became so great on account of the powers he could wield with the aid of this book and such other learning as he received from the great savants of the East, that his name became so honored that his birthplace was claimed by not only his country, Scotland, but also by Italy and Spain, then it is not to be wondered at that the memory of any of our early settlers possessed of like powers should be guarded, and the recollection of their functions and powers be religiously remembered and preserved. In a former paper, the writer mentioned the fact that great and supernatural powers were invested in the possession and intelligent use of 2 books, known as the 6th and 7th Book of Moses. These books were known to exist in the early days among our settlers on the north side of the Blue Mountains, and a favored few were enabled to employ them for their own uses. There existed, however, other charms in necromancy, whether they were a part of these books or belonged to a coordinate branch of the art of witchcraft, is not now known positively. Belief is current that these books and their co-equal charms now all lie buried somewhere in the Blue Mountains. There has never been a Lady Bright to command her Sir William of Deloraine to ride forth in the night in quest of books of might, nor have there been ranksome halls and towers that required their aid from the incursions of the Howards or the Percys, or even from our own Native American Indians since their burial, and that may be the reason that no American wizard has immortalized them in ballad or story, and that they have been left to slumber in that grave, where within it burns a wondrous light to chase the spirits that love the night. That lamp shall burn unquenchably until the eternal doom shall be. But while these books and charms were still in the possession of those who knew their proper and useful functions, and how to wield them for their purposes, they performed most wonderful mysteries. No one was more capable of their use in the early days than Paul Heim, of whom somewhat has already been written in an earlier paper. His supernatural power was the marvel of all the settlement, and was widely known among the Indians, who on this account greatly feared him. He lived but a short distance away from Fort Lebanon, later known as Fort William, before, during, and after the French and Indian War of 1755, and although his life was only threatened and in great peril from death at the hands of the Indian, yet he died a natural death and in the bosom of his family. He had not only powers of divination, but the power to prevent harm to himself and his, and to transform himself into anything animate or inanimate that he fancied. He could in this wise attend the councils of the Indians unobserved, learn their secrets and intentions, and convey them to the authorities, who would prepare themselves accordingly. He could leave his home unprotected apparently, yet no Indian durst molest it. He was accustomed to ride about the country on a little white mare, and she, it is said, was possessed of a strange power, and was likewise an object not alone of curiosity, but of fear. Whenever he left his home and went away for far enough to leave it without his personal protection, he would weave a spell over it which made it proof against the attack of the marauding Indian, as well as against lightning or any other cause of harm. He would write the words of the Holy Trinity on a square slip of paper about 2 inches square. This is written in German, but there is also...
Just read the English translation.
In God's name I do now go out. The Father shield this house about. The Son with all his love thereto defend the house with grace renewed. And Holy Ghost keep thou arm, whatever might this house do harm. With this paper in his hand, he would walk around the house, beginning at the right of the entrance door, and during the time he would walk around it the first time, he would repeat the first 2 lines of the spell, the next 2 during the second round, and the last 2 during the third walk-around. Having done this, he would stand facing the door, and would, in a solemn manner, fold the paper into a triangle, repeating the triangle fold 3 times, and would then place it into the left trouser pocket. The charm being now complete, he would leave the door unbarred, mount his little white mare, and proceed on his journey. The effect of this spell was that no Indian or foe, animal or man, could approach the house from any direction nearer than a circle of 100 feet. The moment he or it would step within the realm of this enchantment, the foe would be transfixed, rooted to the ground, and would remain there until Paul arrived, when depending upon the circumstances, lift of the foe was the forfeit. Many instances of his wonderful transformation are related, and it is proper to say that these relations are authentic and have been handed down from his own times. One day, when weary of grubbing roots in his clearing, he stopped to rest, but soon saw stealthily approaching him several Indians bent upon taking his life. Seeing his peril, he immediately transformed himself into a stump, and the Indians came to the spot, but not able to find him. One burly warrior sat down on the stump and remained there all afternoon, until nightfall, watching for Paul's reappearance, but his watch was in vain. Paul afterwards, in relating the incident, confessed that it was the most uncomfortable position he was ever in, and he hoped never to undergo such a trial again. The Indian seemed to become heavier and heavier. Every moment he became nearly exhausted. His friends and neighbors ever afterwards accounted for his bent form, which seemed to have dated from that day, to the unusual exertion of holding the Indian for half of a day. On one occasion he attended a council of the Indians in the form of a wild cat, approaching near enough to hear their conversation. It was in the night, and just as the council was concluding, one of the wary Indians saw the glare of his eyeballs and quickly fired an arrow which he saw remained sticking in the left foreleg, and ran off thus wounded. On the next day, Paul Heim appeared at Fort Lebanon and announced to Captain Morgan the character of the trouble that was impending from the Indians on the hill, but all of them observed that his left arm was bandaged over a fresh wound from an Indian arrow. Many other instances of this man's supernatural powers are still related of him, and are well authenticated as being contemporaneous beliefs of his own times. Since the greater portion of the people of this section of country believed in the supernatural of that day, and when we consider the veneration all people have for their ancestry, some nations even to this day worshipping them as part of their religion, it is not at all wonderful that these traditions should be handed down to us in their original dress, nor is it even wonderful if there be found among this posterity those who still believe the actual fact, just as their forefathers believed it. Even so great an authority as David Hume, the great English historian, believed that the songs of Ossian were preserved intact in the memories of the people of the north of Scotland for more than 14 centuries until they were committed to writing by James Macpherson, and during nearly all that time, these were a barbarous people. So the Scottish are...
Writing in the 1800s.
Yeah, not many people escape being...
Yeah.
There's nothing now to be seen in these peaceful vales about Fort Lebanon that would indicate the scenes of massacre and havoc that were enacted here a little less than 150 years ago, nor is there aught that would remind one of the supernatural agencies that were so often invoked here as a shield to the white dwellers in the heart of the Indian country, save only that which memory and veneration for the sires of the Blue Mountains have sacredly kept as a tender plant in the hearts of its people. Within that awful volume lies the mystery of mysteries. Happiest they of human race to whom God has granted grace, to read, to fear, to hope, to pray, to lift the latch and force the way, and better had they ne'er been born who read to doubt or read to scorn. And so this man turns into a wildcat, and isn't that the thing that possessed the people in the same area?
In Tumbling Run.
In Tumbling Run?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these Pennsylvania folklorists were absolutely obsessed with Native Americans and cougars / panthers / wildcats.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely obsessed. There's entire books of folklore. It'll be like, the folklore of, name some random region in central Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
And 90% of it is going to be stories about Native Americans and panthers. And it's like, usually it's about like ghosts of Indian maidens and things like that, or like a lost silver mine, but it was, known to the Native Americans. And then tons and tons of stories about, this is about when, old Jacob Stoltzfus killed a panther, like just stories like, okay, like you guys love panthers. They're like absolutely obsessed with them.
If they really existed in Pennsylvania Dutch country, there would be a dish named after the panthers. And they would have used every part of that.
I mean,
panther.
they did exist here, for certainly the Eastern Mountain Lion was here before it went extinct.
But are they talking about sort of supernatural panthers, like dark black, kind of like...
You have to read the bit of folklore to, like sometimes they're just like normal animals. You can tell it's just like, we hunted down this panther, and then other times there does seem to be a supernatural element to it. So this is from the Morning Call from Allentown, Pennsylvania, February 1st, 1931. Strange serpent canes used by Paul Heim, first Pennsylvania German witch doctor, in 1755, unearthed by Morning Call staff writer. William S. Troxell, well-known author of Pennsylvania German column in the weekday Morning Call and recognized authority on Pennsylvania German folklore and literature, compiles interesting account of the activities of the earliest powwow doctor. Writings of ex-judge D.C. Henning of Schuylkill County eulogize the occult as a source for much that is beautiful in the world of literature. Persons who at present believe in witchcraft are few and far between in eastern and central Pennsylvania. The last generation practically witnessed the death of the belief despite the many stories to the contrary. There are, however, instances where persons still believe in the art, and probably will be the case for many years to come. However foolish and nonsensical as witchcraft is, it is intensely interesting as a study of the social and cultural development of a community. It is a part of the great study of folklore, which treats of the development of a people, from a state of superstition and belief to that of truth and clear-minded thinking. I'd love to go back to 1931 and start dissecting things they believed according to today's lens,
That's interesting. In 31, so we were just talking 3 years after
Yeah, it was 31, right? So, 31. Yeah, so just right after, and there were other quote-unquote hex murders still going on. Some time ago, the noted antiquarian and great authority on the literature and social life of the early Pennsylvanians, C.W. Unger of Pottsville, called the attention of William S. Troxell, parentheses, Pumpernickel Bill, of the Morning Call, to two canes in his collection of antiques, which, according to tradition, were once owned by reputed doctors of witchcraft in the pursuit of their art. By courtesy of Mr. Unger, the Morning Call was able to take the foregoing photographs of the canes and make the sketches which appear in this article. Of the smaller cane, with a single rattlesnake twining upon it, little is known, other than it at one time was the cherished possession of a man said to have been a practitioner of the occult art in Schuylkill County. More, however, is known about the larger cane, which, according to authentic tradition, was once owned by Paul Heim, the earliest known witch doctor of Schuylkill County and probably of eastern and central Pennsylvania, who lived prior to the Revolution, or about 1755. It was obtained from a direct descendant of the man many years ago, and is said to have been used by him in drawing mystic figures on the ground or floor of buildings in the practice of his art. Furthermore, the cane was supposed to be possessed with mysterious powers, and its owner never ventured from the house or did any witching without its company. The cane is of very sturdy form and structure and shows that it was used for very extraordinary purposes. It is fashioned after Aaron's rod in the Bible, has a very heavy cone-shaped top ornamented with myrtle leaves and carvings, and has two twin spotted serpents twining the entire length of the cane. A very interesting sketch of the life and activities of Heim was written in 1911 by Honorable D.C. Henninger and appeared in an issue of the Schuylkill County Historical Society Proceedings, from which extracts are reprinted, and then it just goes on to reprint one of the articles you just read. Not much more on the actual canes themselves. It does show a picture of them.
And where are they now?
That is a good question.
Are they in the Historical Society there?
That is a good question. I'd love to know.
And is there a tradition of snake-based canes that you've found?
Of canes and walking sticks with powwow doctors, but
the particular serpent-based?
Yeah, the serpent I've not found, but Miss Eleanor Sturmer of the Morning Call Circulation Department obligingly poses for a photograph holding the canes that are close to 2 centuries old and once wielded so much power for both good and evil. On the sides appear sketches of the canes with their twining serpents.
Oh, they're actually a little more ornate than I thought.
Mm-hmm.
Huh. Yeah, where are they?
Yeah, where are they? That's a good question.
Should be pretty easy if they exist to cross-reference them with this to prove that that's what they are, right? They could just be sitting somewhere in a historical society without anybody.
Somebody's collection or something. Yeah, I mean.
Oh, we gotta find one of these.
Yeah. So that's Paul Heim. That's all we know. But I thought he was an interesting character.
I mean, really, from being at a time before most of the counties in Pennsylvania. So I looked it up. Berks County is 1752. York's 1749. So this is he's living there before these largely before these places even exist that we know of today.
Yeah, I mean, complete frontier at that time.
Interesting hearing about the original Michael Scott from that area.
All of these writings come from, it's a book called The Publication of the Historical Society of Schuylkill County, Volume 3. They were originally printed in a series of newspaper articles called Tales of the Blue Mountains. And they were written by D.C. Henning. This isn't specifically related to Paul Heim, but it is an interesting little story. Boone's Uppers technically probably included those lands now the site of Schuylkill Haven, and lying southward and eastward of the town. Yet tradition says, and it seems from recitals in ancient deeds, that it included a large portion of the lands lying east and west of the Schuylkill, south of Schuylkill Haven, and north of the Blue Mountains. Old Fort Lebanon, which was built by Captain Jacob Morgan in 1755 under the direction of Benjamin Franklin, is located on these uppers, or within sight of them to the southward. This ancient fort and its surroundings are filled with historical anti-revolution association, meaning before the revolution, not A-N-T-I, A-N-T-E, which have been more fully described and recounted in former papers. Probably one of the most ancient artificial landmarks of this section of the country is a barn standing on the old Dibert farm, now owned by John A. Filbert, Esquire, which, by an inscription appearing on one of its foundation stones, appears to have been erected in 1792. On the north side of the Dibert farm, and near the roadside, may still be seen some of the original rocks that once formed what is known as the Devil's Corner, or the Devil's Retreat. Here his sulphurous magnificence was wont to sit and ponder how he might keep pace with the civilization that was then planting the colors of its vanguard in these benighted mountains. How he might by spell and incantations fill the heart of the outraged Indian with malignant hate and fury, so that he would rush upon the defenseless homes of the poor, homesick, and toil-worn Christian settlers. Here he sat, with his fallen angels as his cohorts about him in the year 1755, and casting his eyes to the eastward, he saw but a few miles away a house of public worship, which had but recently been built by the pious Germans who lived in the beautiful vale. It was the original Red Church, on the old turnpike road near Pinedale. Here in the midst of the forest primeval, in the home of the wild beast, they had erected and consecrated to the cause of salvation, through his death on the cross, God's house. Here they could worship him according to the dictates of their own conscience. Satan grew wrathful as he sat here, with his cabinet about him, and the destruction of this temple alone would appease him. Did he himself destroy it? No, he must needs, as is so loftily portrayed in the poems of Milton, put it into the hearts of others to fight his battles. So he and his cohorts changed their forms, and as spirits entered into the hearts of the furious Indians, and amid torch and fiendish yell, the first sanctuary that Christianity erected in Schuylkill County succumbed to the hunger of the flames that lighted up the forests of the Blue Mountains for miles around. That was his first and his only great victory, for soon the strong hands of these hardy Christian pioneers built them another church where the old one stood, and on the same spot still stands its representative. The people grew stronger and clothed in the mail of faith, and with the sword of the Spirit they made war upon this stronghold of his satanic majesty, and drove him out from amongst them, and nothing now remains but a few of the rocks that one time formed his throne in this sylvan retreat. Those who have claimed to have had more intimate knowledge of the spiritual in this world, yet proclaim that at stated intervals he or some of his imps returned to this spot, doubtless to inspire the heart of some luckless wight with an avenging spirit for the wrongs he suffered in a land where he had hoped to have supreme sway, but as often they are driven away. Now you like a theme, Allison.
Yeah.
It's based on that last story.
I really like that one. I forgot about him.
A postcard of His Satanic Majesty.
And his friends, apparently. They seem like they're having a grand time.
Yeah.
I mean, it says at the bottom, we had a hot time.
2 ladies and a feller dancing, and the devils below them lighting a fire in a barrel. This is from 1911. At least that's what the postmark says. A funny little devil postcard here, antique postcard. This will be our curiosity of the week. I'll take a photo of that, and I'll put an image of that in the show notes. If you click on that, it'll take you to our Etsy shop where you can purchase that, or other curiosities of the week, those that are left. Don't usually like to do 2 of the same thing in a row, but the postcard fits the bill for keeping the theme.
Okay.
So.
Yeah. And yeah, he's a fun devil, right? Like
I mean, they look happy. They don't look like they're being tortured in the fires.
No, it looks like one of their favorite people showed up to the party. Like
they're just dancing around the devil.
And when Lucifer shows up, it's going to be a party.
It's a hot party. No pun intended. Or maybe so. Maybe pun intended. Also at Etsy, you can get Strange Familiars t-shirts, stickers, patches, and more. You can get artwork, prints and originals, including the artwork for tonight's show, which I did finish already, so it's definitely going to be there. My books are there. If you get them from us on Etsy, they'll come signed. Allison has various bits of ephemera and old photos and such up there. Go ahead and check it out. Our Etsy shop name is Lost Grave, but if you type in Strange Familiars, you should see our stuff come up. I want to thank everybody who's purchased from Etsy, from our Etsy shop. That is a huge help as well. It's another way to help the show. All right. Once again, GoFundMe is in the show notes and the link. And Allison's Antique Shop is in State Theater Vintage in Columbia, Pennsylvania. And the one we share with Chad is in Black Rose Antiques in Hanover, Pennsylvania. Guess that's about it. And we'll be back soon with more Strange Familiars. Strange Familiars is a production of Dark Holler Arts. Intro and background music is by Stone Breath. If you want to hear more or purchase music, you can go to stonebreath.bandcamp.com. New albums coming soon. I'm just kind of working on the final bits of them. We are on Facebook, facebook.com/strangefamiliars, where you can join the Strange Familiars Gathering group. We're on Instagram @strangefamiliars, one word, no underscore. Please give us a follow there. YouTube memberships will start soon. That'll just basically mirror the Apple Podcast membership. So you join, you get the bonus episodes monthly. There's a couple different programs on YouTube, so that they will be starting soon as well. So make sure to subscribe to us on YouTube if you haven't. That doesn't cost anything. And then if you want to become a member there, that option will be available soon. For Strange Familiars merch, it's strangefamiliars.com/merch. And strangefamiliars.com is where you can find information, links to everything we do, notes on the show, all that stuff. I Have Never Minded the Loneliness, Hermits and Their Stories, is the latest book by Timothy Renner. What compels a person to leave behind society, forsaking family, friends, and the comforts of modern life to live in solitude? The hermits of the 19th and early 20th centuries are as fascinating as they are mysterious. These enigmatic figures often became the focus of public interest, with newspaper stories turning them into local legends, folk heroes, and symbols of a life apart. In I Have Never Minded the Loneliness, you'll discover the extraordinary lives of hermits who defied convention. John Stink, rumored to have died and risen again more than once. William Woodruff, whose long vow of silence followed a broken heart. Brusher Mills, the serpent hunter who sold his own snake oil remedies. And Truman Commodore Downs, who claimed Mars as his homeland. These stories and many more reveal the complex lives of individuals who chose to live apart from the world. I Have Never Minded the Loneliness is available now at Amazon.com or wherever you buy books. The silver cords are tangled at our feet, and the threads of life have twisted in defeat. Mother of mercy, untie the knots. Mother of God, untangle us. We beseech thee, Holy Queen, untie the knots, untie the knots. Children, sending up our sighs in this vale of tears. To heaven do we cry, Mother of mercy, untie the knots. Mother of God, untangle us. We beseech thee, Holy Queen, untie the knots, untie the knots. The world, it seems, tumbled upside down, and in this exile it feels that we are bound. Mother of mercy, untie the knots. Mother of God, untangle us. We beseech thee, Holy Queen, untie the knots, untie the knots. Mother of mercy, untie the knots. Mother of God, untangle us. We beseech thee, Holy Queen, untie the knots, untie the knots, untie the knots.